Whoever America elects as president will have a profound impact on the world, especially Africa. By 2050, 1 in 4 people on the planet will be African, and 1 in 3 young people will be African, making the continent's empowerment essential for shaping the future. But who will stir this ship, and what will it look like? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? While a growing number of Black people in the US and across Africa lean towards Trump, especially Black men, the majority of Black American voters support Harris. Kamala and Trump are not the only options. There's also Jill Stein, who's gaining traction amongst Black and Muslim Americans.
I actually do think that Democrats do have a program for Black America. Their program for Black America is white supremacy.
So what's your overall vision of foreign policy? And she said to dismantle the American empire. If you take the $1 trillion a year that are being thrown away, murdering other people's children in foreign countries, and instead put that into investments in infrastructure, into social housing, into healthcare in this country, then that looks like a flourishing, prosperous future, not just for Black America, but for all of America.
The research says you have never won an election. One thing that AOC has done that you haven't is win some elections.
So if you're just looking at this as what is going to happen in November, then you don't understand the strategy. You have to build a third-party movement.
But who is the better choice for Pan-African empowerment? Who will build bridges of hope rather than oppression? Is the chaos Trump brings exactly what's needed to dismantle Western imperialism and the white power structure? Or can Kamala break free from the imperialist strategies of her predecessors? In this video, we will explore 3 key questions. Is Kamala Harris simply another political blackface used to strengthen Western hegemony? Though Donald Trump is labeled a white supremacist, could his self-serving brand of white supremacy actually dim NATO's light and weaken its neocolonial influence? Will Kamala Harris seize this opportunity to lead Pan-African liberation, especially with Africa's growing global significance? This is a comprehensive guide to the US election and the political system at large. Together, we will unpack how the strategies and systems affect not just Black America, but Pan-African empowerment at large. If you're new here, my name is Kenem O. You're watching Business in Nigeria, a channel about Nigeria's economic liberation. If you're interested in this kind of content, please consider subscribing.
It's you liberals who have lifted them up, Howard.
Paul, you conservatives make a mistake. You can't afford to strangle hope in people. Without hope, people become dangerous.
No, Howard, you liberals have let them invade our society. You give them jobs, political jobs.
Paul, you missed the point. It's only the smart ones we move up.
That makes it even worse.
No, we have to move them up. If we leave a smart one in the ghetto, he might develop into a leader against us. But if we raise him up into white society, we neutralize him. He feels compelled to try to act like us. He loses his identity and his racial anger, if he has any. He becomes alien to his brothers. They realize he sold them out and they grow to hate him. He becomes worthless to them and safe for us. No, thank you. In fact, in his love for the creature comforts, except for his color, he's become one of us.
Kamala Harris could become the first woman president, echoing the historic significance of Obama's presidency. However, could her intersectionality be a tool for liberal political manipulation? Not long ago, we witnessed the horrors of blackwashing unfolding against Africans, orchestrated by none other than former President Barack Obama.
NATO has been the most successful alliance in human history.
He's adored by millions, and his wife Michelle is cherished even more for her apolitical demeanor. His legacy includes the Affordable Care Act, LGBT marriage equality, and initiatives that uplifted many Americans, especially those battling poverty. But what if I told you Obama did a lot of harm to the economic building blocks of Black independence and liberation? The propaganda doesn't reveal these truths.
Barack Obama is one of the worst things that ever happened to African people, because it was Barack Obama who engineered African command by going into Africa, making African countries think they would be benefited by U.S. military presence.
So, Eugene, today we have AFRICOM and a growing number of U.S. bases and troops across the African continent. But if you look at where those bases are, it's pretty much a stripe from coast to coast across Central Africa. Why is that?
They want to make sure that the existing neocolonial setup is not destabilized by these conflicts. This is really the front line of the defense, if you will, these neocolonial countries, primarily in West Africa, but also in other parts of the continent, that are enforcing the writ and the rule of Western multinationals that are partnered up with them to remove a number of critical resources. What they want to do is extract as many resources as they can from the country and not let any of that trickle down. So almost all of them have states that have strong Western-backed, Western-armed, Western-trained militaries. They want to do whatever they can to make sure that the movements and the conflicts inside the northern parts of those countries don't destabilize those countries and destabilize the ability to remove resources.
Correct me if I'm wrong. No people ever got freedom, justice, and equality with the help of the people oppressing them.
About a decade ago, I was part of Obama's White House press corps. I traveled to 5 African countries from 2013 to 2015 with the president and his entourage. In just a few moments, President Obama will be standing right here with the Ethiopian Prime Minister addressing human rights issues as well as the civil war in Sudan. Remember when he signed deals in a lot of African nations to establish a military presence? Yes, I was there. Some of these deals were inked on those trips. While he distracted African leaders with speeches on anti-LGBT laws and typical Western hand-wringing, it seems he had insidious plans for Africa.
You often hear Africans in the diaspora who know next to nothing about the political history and current challenges of the African continent, who like to speak out of their anus and say things like Africa should have been fixed herself by now. That is a very ignorant, uninformed statement that is often made by Africans in the diaspora to look at the mother continent and say Africa should have fixed her problems by now. She's been independent for 60 years. And then Africans in the continent will look at Africans in America, in Canada, in Europe and say, you guys been out of slavery for more than a century and a half. Why haven't you fixed your problems? So both perspectives are born of an ignorance of the wicked wisdom of global white supremacy.
Before you can fully grasp the gravity the US government plays in Africa, you would first need to understand their shared yet hidden history.
Let's go back to the 1885 Berlin Conference, when Africa was first carved up by the world's imperialist empires. The British, French, Italian, Spanish, and other empires all got a slice, but the United States was just a baby empire at the time, so it got none of Africa. What changed? What really began the era of the US empire staking its claim, planting its flag on the continent.
If anything ever shows us the dangers of humanitarian intervention in history, we have our recent history. The Berlin Conference is definitely one. Most people actually have no idea. The Berlin Conference was actually called, allegedly, against slavery. It was being used as a pretext for these countries to carve up different parts of Africa and to say, well, we're doing it for good humanitarian reasons. So the US really becomes a major factor in all of these pieces, really in a major way after World War II. One of the most important things of the new century, of the post-war century, is that it was leading to and should lead to, in their view, or what they were saying, the collapse of the colonial empires, the British, the French, the Portuguese, the Belgians, that this was just totally, the Germans as well, completely and totally impossible to continue having a world where there are all these colonized peoples. World War II, of course, had, among other things, been a big impetus for nationalist movements to emerge against colonial powers. But the issue of national liberation was a huge factor, whether we're talking about the Gold Coast, that would become Ghana, whether we're talking about Kenya, many of these different places, both in the context of the war itself, that allowed people to exploit the differences between major powers to build up nationalist movements, but also in terms of many people who went to fight, who, similar to World War I as well, after seeing, such death and destruction, were unwilling to accept, the continued colonization of their countries. So you have, right after World War II, a big upsurge in colonial movements. Now, the United States was trying to take advantage of this because they wanted the British and the French Empire in particular to collapse. What needed to happen is that the colonial empires needed to go away, and that there needed to be whoever was the strongest in terms of business or whatever should be able to use the free market to succeed. Now, of course, the US was the strongest. Europe was completely destroyed. The US had the most money, all the largest capitalist corporations. So it wasn't altruistic and it wasn't really anti-colonial, but the collapse of the British and the French empires was the precondition for America to really emerge as a global empire on the basis of neocolonialism. So in the late 50s, especially, the US becomes, very interested in saying, well, we want to promote African liberation. And you see things like Vice President Richard Nixon is at the inauguration for Kwame Nkrumah in 1957 when Ghana becomes independent.
Now, Western narratives tell us US military are there to save people and improve lives through counterterrorism efforts. But history reveals a stark reality. And after all, those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it.